Beneath the bustling streets of Manhattan lies a vault containing thousands of tons of gold worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Surprisingly, the vast majority of this gold doesn't belong to the United States. It belongs to countries all over the world. Sure, don't attempt any break-in here. The prison doors will greet you. Instead, imagine yourself as a New Yorker and take a weekend tour. That would be a unique idea. Let's see if the following locations deserve a place on your list. 6 million acres of forest, and almost none of it fenced in. That's bigger than Yellowstone, Glacier, the Everglades, and the Grand Canyon combined. Yet there's no gate here, no entrance fee, no closing time. About half of that land is private, small towns and farms tucked inside the wild, but from above, the forest just keeps going. Fed by more than 30,000 miles of rivers and streams, the water here doesn't wander. It cuts, carving straight through solid rock on its way out. Every fall, the maples go first, and by early October, the whole park turns from green to fire in a matter of weeks. "42 peaks push past 4,000 feet here, and Mount Marcy, the tallest at 5,344 feet, is usually the first place that color shows up each year. Every tent pitched under these pines, every camper parked between the trees, is proof people still come here just to slow down. More than 3,000 lakes sit inside this park, most of them still enough that morning fog just settles over the water and stays. The leaves don't fall all at once. They let go one at a time, like the forest is in no rush to finish. This is what Forever Wild was written into a state constitution to protect. Not a postcard, a whole ecosystem still doing exactly what it's always done. Before we head to the next spot, here's a fun question. Which iconic New York food is often sold by street vendors with mustard and ketchup? Comment your answer. 2 countries, 3 waterfalls, and 1 drop that never actually stops. Horseshoe Falls, the big one on the Canadian side, curls over the edge in a wall nearly 190 feet high and almost half a mile wide. Roughly 90% of the entire river funnels through that single curve, close to 680,000 gallons crashing over it every second. On the American side, the water drops through jagged boulders instead of one smooth sheet framed by bare trees along the bank. The spray climbs so high it drifts back over the railings as fog, and in winter it freezes onto everything it touches: the railings, the binoculars, people's coats. The water itself never stops moving, though. Despite what people assume, Niagara Falls does not actually freeze over. At night, and again through the winter, engineers quietly divert more than half that flow into hydroelectric tunnels, then hand it back for the daytime crowds. All of it was carved in about 12,000 years, glacial meltwater tearing straight through the Niagara Escarpment on its way to Lake Ontario. Downriver, jet boats push straight into the current, running full speed toward the base of the falls until the spray swallows them whole. Everyone on board is soaked before they even get a clear look at the wall of white in front of them. Wooden platforms cling to the rock right at the foot of the falls, close enough that conversation just stops and the roar takes over. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our interesting videos. She's 305 feet from the base to the tip of the torch, and from the harbor she looks even taller than that. This is Liberty Enlightening the World, a gift from the people of France, finished in Paris in 1884 and reassembled here 2 years later. The frame holding that copper skin together was engineered by Gustave Eiffel, the same man who'd go on to build the tower in Paris. Her shell was never actually green. It started out shiny and reddish-brown and took about 20 years of salt air to oxidize into the patina everyone recognizes today. In her raised right hand, the torch alone runs 29 feet from flame to handle, sheathed in gold leaf that catches whatever light is left at dusk. Her crown carries 7 spikes, one for each continent and ocean, with 25 windows inside that once let visitors look straight out over the harbor she watches. In her other hand, a tablet reads July 4th, 1776, in Roman numerals, the date held up for anyone arriving by water to read. At her feet, broken chains lie half hidden in the folds of her robe, freedom from tyranny built right into the base. She was dedicated on October 28, 1886, and for more than 14 million immigrants who passed beneath her by boat, she was often the first piece of America they ever saw. Even now, strong wind can rock her body about 3 inches and her torch nearly twice that, a sway most people below never notice. We worked really hard to make these videos, and of course, your support is a huge motivation. If you love us, you can scan the QR code here to buy us a cup of coffee. Manhattan is one narrow island, only about 13 miles long and just over 2 miles across at its widest, and somehow the whole world decided to build its skyline right here. More than 8 million people live across the 5 boroughs, packed together tighter than almost anywhere else in the country. Underneath all of it runs the subway, 472 stations, more than 665 miles of track, moving over 4 million people a day, every day, all year. Above ground, yellow cabs still thread through streets laid out on a grid 2 centuries ago. Times Square runs bright enough to be seen from blocks away after dark, screens stacked on screens above crowds that never quite stop moving. A few blocks off, Fifth Avenue empties out under bare winter trees, the same skyline sitting quietly at the far end of the street. A few miles north, the Chrysler Building held that same title for exactly 11 months, back in 1930, before the Empire State Building took it away. Its stainless steel spire was built in secret inside the tower and hoisted into place in under 2 hours, just in time to steal the record. At night, the city doesn't really go dark. It just changes color. Glass towers turning into a grid of a few million lit windows, one street at a time. In the 1850s, this was 843 acres of swamp, rock, and scattered farmland. Nobody wanted it, which is exactly why the city could afford to take it. About 1,600 people were living on that land, including a mostly black settlement called Seneca Village, and all of them were displaced to build the park. Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux won the design competition in 1858 with a plan they called Greensward, an open green lawn where none had existed. Building it took nearly 20,000 workers, close to 3 million cubic yards of moved soil, and more gunpowder to blast the rock than was later fired at the Battle of Gettysburg. They planted over 270,000 trees and shrubs by hand, on ground that had almost none to begin with. Sheep Meadow was first cleared for military drills, then spent 70 years as an actual sheep pasture before the flock moved to Brooklyn in 1934. The boulders still scattered through the park aren't decoration. They're glacial rock left behind about 18,000 years ago, older than the city built around them. Around the reservoir named for Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, a 1.5-mile running path circles water that once supplied drinking water to the entire city. In fall, the park turns the same colors it always has, red and gold moving in from the edges, while the skyline behind it stays exactly where it was. Even the squirrels move like they own the place, ducking through leaf litter that's been settling in the same spot for over 160 years. In winter, the same lawns go quiet under snow, and a gold-leafed statue at the park's entrance keeps watch over paths that are usually packed. Every year, more than 42 million visits happen inside this rectangle of imported soil and blasted rock, right in the middle of the busiest island in the country. If you've been here before, comment number 1. If not, comment number 9. Times Square wasn't always called that. Until 1904, this intersection was known as Longacre Square, mostly stables and carriage shops. The New York Times moved its headquarters here that year. The city renamed the square after the paper, and crowds started gathering by the hundreds of thousands almost immediately. A moving news ticker once wrapped around that same tower, running headlines with nearly 15,000 light bulbs back in 1928. Since 1987, city zoning has actually required buildings here to carry illuminated signage. The lights aren't decoration, they're the law. Roughly 50 million visitors pass through every year, with as many as 460,000 people crossing this intersection on the busiest days. Around the square sits the theater district, home to most of Broadway, its marquees lit up nightly with whatever show happens to be running. Just off the plaza, the Paramount building has looked out over this same corner for decades, now home to a major broadcast network. Every New Year's Eve, a crystal-covered ball descends from a pole atop One Times Square, a tradition that started in 1907 after the city banned rooftop fireworks for safety. Costumed characters and street performers still work the plaza for tips, part of the crowd ever since the square went car-free and became a place for people to just stand still and look up. This bridge was the longest suspension span in the world when it opened in 1883, and for years it was the only fixed crossing between Manhattan and Brooklyn. John Roebling designed it, but he never saw it built. A ferry crushed his foot during early surveying, and he died of tetanus a few weeks later. His son Washington took over as chief engineer, then developed decompression sickness after too many hours inside the underwater caissons digging the foundations. Left partially paralyzed, he ran the entire project from a window in Brooklyn Heights, watching construction through a telescope for over a decade. His wife, Emily Warren Roebling, became his link to the site. She taught herself the math behind cable tension and catenary curves, and effectively managed daily construction herself. When the bridge finally opened on May 24, 1883, she was the first person to cross it, riding a carriage over the span with a rooster in her lap for luck. The two Gothic stone towers rise 277 feet above the water, built from limestone, granite, and cement. Its four main cables use the same wire spinning method Roebling had patented decades earlier, and together they hold more than 14,000 miles of wire. Construction took 14 years and cost around $15 million, and at least 20 workers died before it was finished. Today, the promenade still sits above the traffic exactly the way Roebling planned it, carrying pedestrians across the same water his caissons once dug beneath. Which region are you curious about? Let us know in the comments. We'll see you there in the next video. For nearly 40 years, this building was the tallest thing in the world, and it still looks the part today. It went up in just 410 days, about 4.5 stories a week, right in the middle of the Great Depression, when nobody was sure it would ever find tenants. Architects redesigned it 15 times before construction even started, mostly because the Chrysler Building kept adding height and Empire State's owners refused to lose that race. It opened on May 1, 1931, with President Hoover switching on the building's lights by pressing a button all the way from Washington, D.C. The very top of the spire was originally built as a mooring mast for airships, meant to let dirigibles dock and unload passengers straight onto the 86th floor. It never really worked. High winds made docking too dangerous, so the mooring station became an observation deck instead. At 1,454 feet, including its antenna, it held the title of world's tallest building until the original World Trade Center passed it in 1970. Today, about 4 million people ride its elevators up to the 86th and 102nd floor observatories every year. Since 1976, the top of the tower has been lit in different colors for holidays and events, a tradition that still runs most nights. The building has appeared in more than 250 films since it opened, most famously in King Kong back in 1933. Almost a century later, it's still considered the most photographed building on Earth, watching over the same stretch of Fifth Avenue where it first rose. This street runs barely a third of a mile, and somehow it still means the entire American financial system to most of the world. The name goes back to 1653, when Dutch settlers built an actual wall here, a 12-foot wooden barrier meant to defend New Amsterdam. The English tore that wall down in 1699, but the street kept its name long after the wall itself was gone. In 1792, 24 brokers gathered under a buttonwood tree just down the block and signed an agreement fixing trading rules among themselves, the founding document of the New York Stock Exchange. That agreement is why the exchange still keeps a buttonwood tree planted outside its doors today, a small living reminder of where all of this started. Right across the street, Federal Hall marks the spot where George Washington took the oath of office in 1789, when this was briefly the nation's capital. The current stock exchange building opened in 1903, its Corinthian columns and 70-foot ceiling built to look like a temple of commerce. It survived a deadly bombing in 1920, the 1929 crash that triggered the Great Depression, and a 4-day shutdown after September 11th, its longest closure since 1933. Just down the block, a small bronze girl faces down the famous charging bull, placed there in 2017 as a symbol of a very different kind of financial power. Around the holidays, a Christmas tree goes up right in front of the exchange's columns, an odd bit of small-town tradition in the middle of the world's biggest financial district. Albany has been continuously chartered since 1686, making it the oldest city charter still in use anywhere in the country. Dutch traders built the first outpost here in 1614, a fur trading fort that predates the country itself by more than a century and a half. It became New York's permanent capital in 1797, after the legislature spent years bouncing between here, Kingston, and Poughkeepsie. The state capitol took 32 years to build, from 1867 to 1899, going through 5 different architects before Theodore Roosevelt finally declared it finished. Its Great Western Staircase alone took 14 years to carve, with 77 faces hidden in the stone, including Lincoln, Douglas, and Susan B. Anthony. A few blocks south, Governor Nelson Rockefeller built an entirely different Albany in the 1960s and 70s, the Empire State Plaza, 11 buildings clad in more than 40,000 tons of marble. Its tallest tower, the 44-story Corning Tower, rises 589 feet, 34 feet taller than the Washington Monument, and still the tallest building in the state outside New York City. Beside it sits The Egg, a rounded concrete theater that wasn't finished until 1978 and still looks like nothing else on the skyline. Down along the water, the Hudson River that once carried Dutch fur traders now runs past highway bridges and a skyline it helped build. Around all of it, blocks of brownstone row houses and tree-lined streets still hold on to a city that's been standing, one version or another, for over 400 years. The content of this video is compiled from various sources. Please leave a comment below if you find any inaccuracies. Long Island stretches 118 miles into the Atlantic, making it the largest island in the entire continental United States. Everything here was shaped by glaciers roughly 21,000 years ago, which pushed rock and gravel into two ridges running down the island's spine. That's also why the two shores look so different. The North Shore stayed rocky with glacial debris, while the South Shore got the fine, sandy outwash the glaciers left behind. Along the North Shore, Gilded Age industrialists built more than 500 waterfront mansions in a stretch that's still nicknamed the Gold Coast. Fewer than half of those estates survive today. Most were sold off, subdivided, or turned into museums after World War II. The Long Island Railroad reached all the way out to Greenport back in 1844, and it still carries more daily commuters than any other railroad in the country. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh took off from a Long Island airfield on the flight that made him the first person to cross the Atlantic alone, non-stop. Down at the water's edge, small harbor towns still run on fishing boats and marinas that have worked this coastline for generations. With more than 7.5 million people living across its 4 counties, Long Island holds more residents than most entire U.S. states. Buffalo sat at the western end of the Erie Canal when it opened in 1825, and that one connection turned a small lake town into the world's biggest grain port within decades. Hydroelectric power from nearby Niagara Falls made Buffalo the first American city with widespread electric lighting, earning it the nickname, the City of Light. That electricity was shown off at the 1901 Pan American Exposition, the same event where President William McKinley was shot and later died here in the city. City Hall itself, this 32-story Art Deco tower, opened in 1932 and cost about $6.8 million to build, one of the priciest city halls in the country at the time. It held the title of Buffalo's tallest building for nearly 40 years until one Seneca Tower passed it in 1970. Down at the waterfront, the old commercial slip, the literal starting point of the Erie Canal, has been excavated and re-watered as part of Buffalo's Canalside District. A retired Navy destroyer now sits permanently docked nearby, one more piece of a working harbor that built this entire city. Autumn sets the Hudson Highlands on fire, and Bear Mountain Bridge cuts straight through the color. It opened in 1924 as the longest suspension bridge in the world, a record it held for less than 2 years. Further south, the hills give way to something older, the Palisades, a wall of rock formed 200 million years ago from magma that never made it to the surface. In places, these cliffs rise more than 500 feet straight up out of the water. Runners and cyclists move along the base of them today, with the Manhattan skyline rising just past the trees. The same river that cuts through solid basalt eventually widens into New York Harbor. From a glacier-carved gorge to a city skyline, the Hudson never really stops changing shape. From above, Brooklyn looks less like one city and more like hundreds of small ones stitched together. Rooftops, elevated tracks, and brownstones running as far as you can see. If Brooklyn were its own city, its 2.6 million people would make it one of the largest in the country. It actually was its own city once, until it merged into New York on January 1st, 1898. The clock tower that still dominates downtown, the old Williamsburg Savings Bank building, was the tallest thing in Brooklyn for about 80 years. A few blocks away, Barclays Center opened in 2012, bringing professional sports back to the borough for the first time in over half a century. Not far off, the Brooklyn Museum has been collecting art since 1897 and now holds roughly 500,000 objects. Head toward the water and the streets change completely. Tree-lined blocks, a church spire, brownstone stoops along the heights. From the promenade, the whole Manhattan skyline sits right across the river, close enough to feel like part of the neighborhood. Further north, old warehouses and industrial rooftops line the Williamsburg waterfront, a bridge stitching the two boroughs together overhead. Inland, the borough shifts again. Public housing towers, row houses, murals, painted straight onto brick. On the ground, it's double-parked cars, corner stores, and people walking like they've got somewhere to be. Morning fog doesn't clear off Lake George so much as it lifts, slowly, off water that's been here since the last glaciers melted about 10,000 years ago. The lake runs about 32 miles north to south, tucked right against the base of the Adirondacks. In 1791, Thomas Jefferson stood on this shore and called it the most beautiful water I ever saw, and the nickname that followed, Queen of American Lakes, has stuck ever since. More than 170 islands are scattered across the surface, some barely big enough for a single tent. At its deepest point, the lake drops to about 187 feet. A steamboat still cruises these waters the old-fashioned way, cutting a slow wake through the evening light. Down in the village, porches line up along the shore, rocking chairs facing the water instead of each other. A father and daughter walk hand in hand through fallen leaves, in no particular hurry. As the sun goes down, the hotels along the shoreline light up one by one. "200 years after Jefferson's letter, people still come here for exactly the same reason he did. Chinatown squeezed itself into lower Manhattan more than 150 years ago, and it hasn't really stopped growing since. Today, it's the largest Chinatown in the United States, home to the biggest concentration of Chinese immigrants anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. The whole neighborhood started around just 3 streets, Mott, Pell, and Doyers, back in the 1870s. From that small beginning, it eventually spread from about 7 blocks to more than 50. A statue of Confucius still stands watch over the sidewalks, one of the quietest spots in a neighborhood that rarely slows down. Fire escapes zigzag down tenement buildings that are more than a century old, once used as makeshift porches on hot summer nights. Lines form outside the busiest spots. With over 300 Chinese restaurants packed into these blocks, there's always somewhere worth waiting for. Public housing towers rise just past the old tenements, their brick walls covered in murals and graffiti. By night, the crowds thin out, and the elevated roadways and bridges take over the skyline instead. Manhattan is the smallest of New York's 5 boroughs, just 23 square miles, and also the most densely packed. About 1.6 million people call it home, but on any given weekday that number swells past 3 million once commuters and workers pour in. Nearly all of it sits on a street grid mapped out in 1811, decades before most of the island was even built up. That grid is why crosswalks fill instantly the second the light changes, block after block. Underneath the streets, subway trains run almost non-stop, carrying a share of that daytime crowd through tunnels that are now more than a century old. Three East River bridges, Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Williamsburg, stitch the island to Brooklyn, several of them visible from the air within blocks of each other. Down in the financial district, the skyline crowds right up against the harbor, with ferries and boats cutting through the water below. Out at Hudson Yards, the newest thing on the skyline isn't a tower at all. It's a spiraling staircase structure known as the Vessel. From the lights of Times Square to the quieter waterfront blocks further east, the pace changes completely depending on which few blocks you're standing on. Rising from the northwest corner of the original World Trade Center site, One World Trade Center reaches 1,776 feet, a height chosen deliberately to echo the year of the Declaration of Independence. It opened in November 2014 after 8 years of construction and now stands as the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere. Its roof alone sits at 1,368 feet, matching the exact height of the original Twin Towers. At the base, 2 reflecting pools sit in the tower's original footprints, each nearly an acre wide. Water drops 30 feet down their walls, making them the largest man-made waterfalls in North America. The names of the victims are engraved in bronze around the edges of both pools. Nearby, the Oculus rises like something mid-flight. Architect Santiago Calatrava described its shape as a bird released from a child's hands. Its steel ribs frame a skylight that opens every September 11th, letting sunlight fall straight down through the hall. Underneath, the hub moves roughly 200,000 commuters and visitors through Lower Manhattan every single day. From the reflecting pools below to the spire catching the last light above, this stretch of the city holds both the loss of one day and the skyline that answered it. Rockefeller Center went up during the depths of the Great Depression, and even then, construction workers found room for a small Christmas tree on the site back in 1931. That tradition became official in 1933, and the tree has been lit here every year since. Below it, an ice rink opened in 1936 and became a permanent fixture by the end of the decade. Today, the whole complex spans 22 acres and includes 19 separate buildings, all linked by underground passages and shared plazas. Flags line the sunken square year-round, fluttering beneath the tower that gives the place its name. That tower, 30 Rockefeller Plaza, rises 850 feet, a 66-story Art Deco landmark finished the same year the tree tradition began. Near the top of the rock observation deck opens up one of the widest views in the city, Central Park included. By night, the limestone facade glows amber against a skyline that stretches toward the Empire State Building a few blocks south. Nearly a century after a few workers pooled their money for a tree, this same stretch of Midtown still marks the start of the holidays for the whole city. The Hamptons start at West Hampton and run east toward Montauk, a string of villages strung along Long Island's South Fork. Southampton, founded in 1640, was one of the first English settlements in New York, decades before most of the country even existed. For over 2 centuries, this stretch of coast ran on farming, fishing, and whaling, with Sag Harbor once one of the busiest whaling ports in America. That started to change in the 1870s, when the Long Island Railroad reached this far east and made the beaches accessible from the city for the first time. By 1882, a New York Times writer had already coined the name that stuck, the Hamptons. Today, the population here swells sharply every summer, then empties out again by fall. Bays like Mauritius and Shinnecock separate the barrier beaches from the mainland, calm water on one side, open ocean on the other. Marinas fill with sailboats and yachts each summer, docks lined bow to stern along the water. Behind the dunes, shingled beach houses sit right up against the sand, porches facing straight out to the Atlantic. As the sun goes down, the harbors glow gold, boats swinging quietly at their moorings. More than 150 years after that first train pulled in, people are still making the same trip east, chasing the same water. New York is a place that never asks you to slow down, yet somehow leaves you wanting to stay a little longer. Its energy comes not only from iconic landmarks, but from the endless creativity, diversity, and ambition found on every street. Every neighborhood tells a different story, offering new perspectives with every walk, meal, and conversation. Whether you're drawn to world-class culture, unforgettable skylines, or unexpected hidden corners, the city always has another surprise waiting. When your journey ends, New York doesn't simply become a destination you visited. It becomes an experience that continues to inspire long after you've left.